Welcome you to TransCelerate's public webinar today, introducing enabling individual participant data return. Next slide, please. We have a great agenda for everyone today. So we'll start with some welcome, of course, webinar logistics and ground rules, and then we'll provide a little bit of background on individual participant data return itself. We'll provide an overview of TransCelerate's individual participant data return initiative, and specifically what we call the iPDR package. And we have a really great panel of experts today where we'll do some question and answer with them. Next slide, please. Just some basic logistics for today's webinar before we dive in. Please note that all participants have been muted for this call in order to ensure a pleasant listening experience for all attendees. You may reduce your GoToWebinar control panel for a better view of the presentation by clicking that orange and white arrow in the upper right corner. We also welcome questions throughout the discussion. These can be submitted using the questions function that you see in your control panel. Be sure to click send after typing your question in the box. And if your question's not answered through Q&A today, we definitely encourage you to send your question or any feedback to our mailbox, info@transceleratebiopharma.com. As a reminder, this webinar may be recorded in whole or in part. Next slide, please. Just a few ground rules, again, before we dive in. We want to make this discussion helpful and answer as many of your questions as we can. Participation in this webinar is voluntary, as is using any of TransCelerate's assets or tools. The responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations is owned by the solution adopter, and you do not have to identify what company you work for. Things that we ask you not to discuss as part of this webinar: what vendor sites or CROs you're using or are not using, any issues you have with any vendors, sites, or CROs, your long-term development plans, as well as anything related to pricing or costs. We cannot answer questions about vendors, costs of using or implementing TransCelerate assets or tools, or which member companies are actually using the assets and tools. Next slide, please. We do have a webinar handout available for all attendees that will have links to the content that we're discussing today and other resources from TransCelerate's Participant Data Return Initiative. You can find that webinar handout again in your control panel, specifically under handouts. Next slide, please. A little bit about TransCelerate. TransCelerate is a not-for-profit entity created to foster collaboration. Our vision is to improve the health of people around the world by accelerating and simplifying the research and development of innovative new therapies. Next slide, please. Since 2012, passionate leaders and subject matter experts from our TransCelerate member companies have volunteered their time to apply their distinctive knowledge, insights, passion, and expertise to advance the TransCelerate mission. Together, we have designed and developed and delivered over 500 nimble and pragmatic solutions to address challenges in preclinical, clinical, and drug safety, all while prioritizing patient needs. Most of our solutions are free for public download and use from our TransCelerate website. Next slide, please. I also want to just say a huge thank you to all of our team members that were part of our Participant Data Return Initiative. You'll see their names listed on the slide. They were all instrumental in helping us develop some of the solutions that you're going to be hearing about today. Next slide, please. We have one of our team members from our Participant Data Return workstream joining us today, who will present all that she's been involved with in developing the individual participant data return package before we open up the webinar to a broader expert panel discussion. This member is also a subject matter expert representing one of our member companies. My name is Ashley Pachter. I'm the event moderator, and I'd like to introduce and welcome Angela Bilkhu, Global Patient Partnership Leader with Rare Blood Disorders from Roche. Without further ado, I have the pleasure of representing Angela. Angela, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, where you are in the world. Really thrilled to be here on behalf of the workstream team. I joined the team about 20 months before we concluded the work, and it's been really a wonderful experience, and I'm really proud of where we landed as a team in terms of the tools that we developed. If we can go to the next slide. So before I jump into getting into the details around individual patient data return, we want to know where you are at in terms of your knowledge around individual patient data return. So would be grateful if you can just go ahead and answer the following question in the poll. Perfect. So the results of the poll, so we have a lot of newcomers to this topic, so I really hope this presentation will be helpful to you to help ground you in terms of what do we mean by individual patient data return and what type of tools there are available to really wrap your head around this topic. We have a number of intermediates in the audience as well as experts. So a really good mix. Really looking forward to interacting with you as we progress through this webinar. So if we can move on to the next slide. Great. So what do we mean by individual participant data return? So when we talk about individual patient data return, what we mean is individual study participant data, including health data of study participants that was collected or generated while that participant was on a clinical trial, so participating in a clinical trial, either at screening or enrollment. And this is usually dictated by the scheduled assessment in the study. The information could have been generated through test results from procedures in the study or from samples that was collected during the study. Individual patient data return is different than layperson summary, which is an aggregate of the study results. So it's a summary of the results of all of the participants. Here we're looking at each participant's individual data that's been generated. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that genetic results was something that we talked about. It was something that we talked about a lot within the context of the work, within the work stream. And we decided as an outset or as a first step that it would be out of scope since it is such a contentious issue. And the team really wanted to focus on looking at pragmatic issues where we can implement now. So it doesn't mean that genetic results is something that won't be considered in the future, but we really did want to focus the team and really come up with a pragmatic solution that could be implemented in today. We can move on to the next slide. So why now? Why do we need to do this now? And there's a number of reasons why. First of all, the topic is gaining a lot of attention among patients. Patients are more empowered, they understand the value of their data, and in terms of developing new treatments that address unmet needs. In my role as a global patient partnership leader, I'm increasingly hearing among clinical participants, how can I get my data back? When can I get my data back? Can I get my data back? So there is an increased interest among patients as well as participants. There's an increased focus and emphasis on flexibility and a personalized approach that helps to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as access, so equitable access. There's been advancements in clinical development collection and digital health that have increased our ability to protect and share data, which could result in patients receiving information in a more timely fashion. But there's also pressure from patients to reduce the gap between healthcare and clinical research to gain access to relevant data that could help them with decision making. We also, as a team, recognize that there may be some patients or participants that don't want their data, and that optionality was going to be really important as we thought about individual participant data return. So if we can move on to the next slide. Perfect. Understanding the current environment, the team felt that there was a number of potential benefits in terms of sharing individual patient data return and individual participant data. And this is included in the tools that we've developed. But one, it really helps to build a trusted relationship, a partnership with your study participants, really reinforcing the fact that we see them as partners in research. Enhancing public trust, fairness, and transparency, which in turn may support more diverse and inclusive participation in clinical trials, supporting health equity and access to all patients, and empowering clinical trial participants to opt in or opt out to receive the data that they're contributing. It empowers them to be an equal partner in clinical research. So if we can move on to the next slide. So this slide really, is important. We're not the first team to tackle this issue. And I would say that part of the work that we did was to actually reflect on the work that was done previously, which has been bundled up in a participant data resource pack. And there's a link on this slide in regards to that. So we did start from a place of knowledge. We know that MRCT and IMI have also been working on this as well, and we've worked collaboratively or built on their experience in order to arrive at the point that we have as TransCelerate in terms of the data, the package that we've pulled together. Most notably is that Pfizer is the first to implement individual patient data return within the context of the work that they're doing. So later on in this webinar, you'll be hearing from these expert panelists in terms of the work that they've been doing within their organization. So if you can move on to the next slide. So what I'm going to do is walk you through an overview of the package that the workstream has put together in order to support you in your individual patient data return journey. So if we can move on to the next slide. At the end of 2023, TransCelerate launched the individual participant data return package. The package includes three main components. The first is a socialization presentation that can be used to educate key internal stakeholders on the potential value of individual participant data return in order to be able to gain support and implement. There's a consideration guide, it provides a little bit of a deep dive into considerations that a sponsor should consider when they're thinking about implementing individual patient data return. And then the third piece is a template, and this is a customizable template that can be used by study teams or program teams to help operationalize individual patient data return at a study or program level. The individual participant data return package was developed based on a broad and extensive member company expert review, which included an impact assessment of the ICH, E6R3, and E8R1. We also felt it was important to engage with patients, site advisory boards, as well as clinical research organizations, as well as other industry collaborations to ensure that the package really resonated and met the needs of a broad audience. We can move on to the next slide. So there's the first piece is a socialization presentation, and this tool is meant for organizations. It's meant to be used by organizations no matter where they are in their individual patient data return journey. So it is very broad. We recognize that each sponsor could be at a different place, and the intent is to utilize the material as needed. So depending on where you are in terms of your journey, you may not fully utilize all the slides, and that's okay, right? You're customizing the slide deck in order to be able to meet the needs of your organization. There's also a number of slides in the socialization deck that can be customized to really address the unmet needs within your organization. If you can move on to the next slide. The consideration guide is really meant to provide a deeper level of understanding and awareness for sponsors who may be considering individual patient data return, a participant data return. The consideration guide provides key considerations for developing systematic processes, so building a business case, for example, identifying key internal, external stakeholders, determining timing of data return, just to name a few, and the approaches for individual data, participant data return back to study participants. So who have we chosen to receive it, and what is the most meaningful way to be able to return that data to them? We can move on to the next slide. So the templates are intended to facilitate decision-making and align key stakeholders while exploring approaches to provide study participants with the option of receiving their clinical study data and results. It's important to make decisions about data shared with the participant prior to the start of a study, and that's really important. I think that's foundational to individual participant data return. For study and program teams, I've decided to return individual data to study participant. Accountable organization studies or program members will be responsible to determine several elements in this process. This includes, but not limited to, the type of data that's being returned, when the data will be returned to participants, and by whom and how the data will be returned. So these are some points that need to be considered when you're pulling together your framework around individual participant data return. So if we can move on to the next slide. So our call to action as a workstream team is, one, to review the package. The package is rich. It has a lot of information. And so it's really your first place to start as you're thinking about what this could look like within the context of your organization. Be proactive. I think historically, when industry is slow to adopt, regulators have mandated a solution. So let's be proactive. Let's get ahead of it. Let's decide how we want to show up in terms of individual participant data return. Engage early with key stakeholders and partners with others within the ecosystem to identify ways to incorporate individual participant data return into existing processes. And finally, as you leverage the package, we want to hear more from you in terms of your experience. So please let us know by visiting the Engage With Us page. And before I hand it over to you, I just want to take a moment and just thank Amber Williams, who was our partner from TransCelerate as we worked through this process. As I shared, I was on the team for 20 months, and her patience and dedication really helped our team to arrive at what we are really proud of in terms of a package around individual participant data return. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, hand it over back to Ashley to go through the panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Angela. Before we begin our panel discussion, and sorry if we can flip maybe one more slide, one more. So before we begin our panel discussion, just wanted to note that responses have been sourced for some of these upfront questions from a variety of panelists and do not necessarily represent the views of all or their respective organizations. So with that, flipping to the next slide, I am so excited to introduce our expert panel. We have so many great faces and people here with you today. And as they all come on camera, just a couple of quick reminders. If you do have a question, please use the questions function in your panel. And if you can, please denote, and we'll go through introductions in a moment, to whom the question is being directed. That will just simplify our process a bit. And of course, depending on the time, we might not be able to answer all questions, but definitely encourage you to please share them with us offline via the mailbox. And as a reminder, again, we are unable to answer questions about vendors, costs of using, implementing TransCelerate assets or tools, or which member companies are using the tools. So with that, I will ask the panel to please give some introductions before we dig into the good stuff. So I'll just go in order of who I see. Sylvia, if you don't mind going first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sylvia Baedorf Kassis. I am a program director at the Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center of Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard. I've had the pleasure of working more in the health literacy space over the last 6 years while I've been at the center, and this intersects very closely with this issue of returning individual results to participants, and clear communication, really thinking through what it is that patients need and want when they're participating in research and when they're done with participating with research. So I'm really excited to be part of this panel, and I'm really grateful to the partnership and collaboration with TransCelerate that, as Angela noted, really looked at the landscape and incorporated work that's already been done to be able to really put forth a package that will, I think, hopefully help move people forward on this issue that has been a little slower to adopt, but has been something that I think is going to become more and more of what we're hearing from our patient and participants. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thanks for being with us, Sylvia. Amy, if I can ask you to go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Fesmire-Baus. I'm a patient engagement and recruitment lead at Bristol Myers Squibb, but I'm also here today as a patient advocate. I've been an advocate with the Adult Congenital Heart Association for 12 years, and a congenital heart disease survivor. I have touch pathology of flow and have had open heart surgery in 1986 and 2012. But I've also been a clinical trial participant, also as a child and an adult. So that's what I'm here to present the perspective of today.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Amy. Paula, if I can ask you to go next.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk with you today. So I'm Paula Boyles. I am the program lead at Pfizer for external data sharing. And as you heard from Angela, at Pfizer, we are actually returning individual data back to participants. So today, hopefully, I can share some of our experiences with you for that. And in addition to my role at Pfizer, I also participated as a member of the team with TransCelerate's. So I've been heavily, actively involved developing this toolkit and feeding in all of our practical experiences. So what you receive in the toolkit is not just theoretical, it's actually based on real life experiences. So hopefully you can find some benefit in that.
Thank you so much, Paula. And last but certainly not least, Johanna, if you don't mind going.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm Johanna Blom. I'm a professor at the University of Modena, and I'm the coordinator of iMyFacilitate project, which is a project that is centered on the clinical trial data return to participants and reutilization, and creating their mandate is creating an ethical legal system that makes that possible. So today I'm participating in that role, also because we have had an ongoing I think open discussion with TransCelerate and with IMRCT, because the ecosystem becomes more and more complex, and I think the more we interact and get to know each other and what is driving each endeavor, the better I think we can help participants understand what is at stake and why we are doing what we are doing. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, great. Yeah, and again, we're so excited to be able to bring this group together. So thank you all so much for your time. So we'll jump right into our panel discussion. Amy, this first one will be for you. If you can please speak to why is individual participant data return important from the patient's perspective, and what are some of the barriers that you see?
Sure. So I think that talking to the first piece about why it's important is that, at least here in the United States, I think we recognize that the patient is that owner of the medical home, or is the medical home. They're the owner of that whole medical history, and it really becomes that patient's responsibility to coordinate all of their specialists and make sure that all of their physicians and various specialist to have all of the information to connect the dots for those healthcare providers. But when a patient is part of a clinical trial, the data that is collected as part of that clinical trial becomes part of that patient's medical history. Therefore, when a patient doesn't have their data, they're missing a piece of their medical history. And then they're going to obviously their study doctor would have access to that, but they're still going to see other doctors outside of the study, either during the study or after the study is completed. And so when they don't have that information to take to these other providers, those providers are then making treatment decisions without knowing the full medical history. And I think many of us would recognize that that is not a good way to be a practicing medicine. So it's important that the patient is aware of the data to be able to communicate that information to their providers. I think we also want to recognize that there's an aspect of autonomy, generosity, and reciprocity here, that the patient is engaged prior to clinical trials and often not updated until the summary of results is distributed. In terms of barriers, I think we see that there's a lot of system issues also, in that I am a patient at 3 different major health centers. Each of them have their own app and portals. Some of the studies that I've participated in have been part of those institutions, and some have been separate. Even those studies that are part of those institutions have their own portals. So I think for the studies that I'm a part of now, plus my health institutions, I think I have 6 different portals that I'm supposed to take information, participate in, completing surveys, and I simply can't remember all the passwords. So it's difficult on that patient side to be having all of these systems. But it's also important that they really interconnect and that my other physicians can see what's happening. So I know interconnectivity of EMR is a much bigger issue here. But I think I do have a story that speaks to kind of why this is important also, in that, and this is genetic data, so I recognize it is outside of the scope of the TransCelerate resource here. But I think the messages here highlight why it's important. And this dates myself a little bit. In the late 90s, I was in high school, and I was at one of my typical clinic visits for my CHD, and they asked us to participate in a genetic study. They were looking at finding if there were genetic markers for tetralogy of flow. So of course my parents consented. I had to assent as I think I was 17 or so. And kind of we went on with our life. Due to the nature of adult congenital heart disease, I even still today have certain tests done at the Children's Hospital and some things done at an adult hospital. So as I moved beyond my 18th birthday, I still would return to the Children's Hospital. And over time, certainly my first visit there after I was 18, I had to formally consent myself. There were times that I was had to reconsent again as they changed the protocol. And I think as recently as 2017 had to give an additional blood sample. So the study is now 20 years old and still ongoing. The year after I gave that most recent blood sample, I got married, and we were talking about having a baby. I'm now in that late advanced maternal age and have a CHD, so it was already a little risky to talk about. But we did get pregnant, and very soon we saw that there was something wrong. But after several visits, we discovered that my son had something called limb body wall complex. It's a fatal anomaly. Most babies with this do not live throughout the pregnancy and to be born. Those who are born only typically live for about 90 minutes. And during that time, their circulation is so compromised that they're really hypoxic and so not conscious. during those 90 minutes. Ultimately, we lost my son in early second trimester. In that discussion of should we try to have another, we now had even more at risk, if you will, advanced maternal age, this CHD, and now a loss on top of it. And anyone who's gone through that, I'm sorry for your loss, but you also recognize that there's a lot of anxiety that complicates that decision to move forward. And I'll say that we did have another baby. He is a healthy, energetic 4-year-old little boy. As I said, our last name is Boss, so he's told me last week that he's the boss and he doesn't have to listen to me. So the story, but as we were talking about this topic, it made me realize that if I had had those results from that study that's ongoing, would that have changed our decision? Would it have made, would we have realized that maybe there was more to discuss and maybe it was really risky to another pregnancy to proceed? Or maybe it would have given me some peace of mind as going through that pregnancy that, you know, this baby would be okay too. So I think what I leave with you is that where my data could have been useful had nothing to do with the study that it was taken from. It's a different specialty. It's 20 years later. Nobody could have predicted when I was 17 and we were signing those consents and assent forms that this data could have been used in a different way in a much later portion of my life. So you just never know when that data will be useful for a patient.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Amy. We really appreciate it and very, very impactful. So yeah, thanks for being willing to share. So the next question is a bit more about the operational barriers preventing data return for those sponsors that want to return data. Obviously, some stakeholders believe that the time has come for sponsors and research to really think about this. But we've heard about these operational barriers that are preventing data return for those sponsors that want to return data. Would love to hear from all of you actually, and we'll give each of you some time to share what recommendations exist for getting started and or optimizing the return of data for those of you who are already doing it. So maybe on the second part of the question, Paul, we'll start with you because we know that, as you mentioned, you're already doing it. So we'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to say is this is possible. You know, there is no operational barrier that's insurmountable. Is it easy? No, I'm not going to claim it is. It needs a lot of thought, a lot of consideration goes into it. But it is possible. So please bear that in mind as you move forward. In terms of what I think would be important to consider, I think the first thing is start small. You know, don't try and implement this for all your studies across the entire organization because that's really just biting off too much to chew. You know, it's unlikely to be successful trying to have such a wide scope right from the beginning. So start small. That's what we did at Pfizer. We started with just 2 pilot studies. Maybe think about focusing on you know, a particular phase of study, or maybe a specific therapeutic area, maybe a specific country. You know, just choose your areas of where you want to tackle first wisely, and base that on your organizational structure, on your organizational priorities. And I think, you know, if you start small and build on that, you're more likely to be successful. Nobody's going to say, you know, whatever you put in to begin with is the final solution. It's a starting point, and it's a point from which you can then build on and widen the scope and broaden the expanse of the solution. So that would be my first recommendation.
Thanks so much, Paula. Sylvia, do you wanna comment?
I would love to. Thank you, Paula, for leading off, and it's been great to see Pfizer actually really taking the lead on doing this. And I just want to really echo what Amy's mentioned around, clinical research participation being part of a person's medical history. And if you think back to all the doctor's visits or all the things you've ever done, in your life, it's very hard to remember all of the pieces of it. So being able to give people some documentation around what they went through and what the information was that was collected about them can be very, very helpful. We know that groups are starting slowly but steadily, like Pfizer, like others, to return individual results and think about that. And so, the idea of the pilot study, the pilot group, the pilot to test it out with maybe a motivated audience, motivated population with whom it would be maybe a little bit, quote unquote, easier to get started because you don't have a huge sell to stakeholders in terms of trying to implement that, I think would be really great. And in terms of the what we have in the MRCT Center individual return of results toolkit and guidance that was released just a couple of years ago, we really talk about the basics. Once you've identified sort of how you want to maybe do a pilot, really having this mindful approach to inventorying, like what is all the data or what are all the data that is being collected, what could those mean? We've talked a lot on our panels and with others in this field, Jean Pizarro, one of them specifically around the idea of even the screening data that people are giving while they're being screened for studies that could be helpful or meaningful to them moving forward as they're going to their annual physicals, their other checkups and everything. We can be helping to perhaps consolidate resources so that people aren't repeating tests or having other exposures if they have the information that is being done with sort of clinical data that's being collected for research purposes like for screening. So I really encourage this idea of inventorying, mindful approach. What are all the pieces that you're collecting, and where can you get started, right? We love the idea that you can return routine test results, right? Test information, as long as you're not compromising the study, returning some routine test results and information. But what's really interesting to participants, what we're hearing and what people don't often learn, and which I was kind of shocked to hear, is that participants don't even find out what study arm they were in, what they were randomized to, what they got while they were in the study necessarily. And so, that really is challenging for patients, participants moving forward with their own care and trying to understand what they just went through in a study and communicate that to their other healthcare providers. So, getting started, it's really the pilot and thinking very thoughtfully about what you have as data in front of you that you could reasonably start to share and not having to do it all at once.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. Johanna, would you like to add?
Yeah, and I think the points mentioned are very important, but I think we also always should remember and make it clear that once you talk about clinical trial or clinical study data, you talk about research data. And as such, they are not necessarily part of clinical routine. There are data that are collected that are part of clinical routine, but I think it should be made extremely clear in a gentle way that a clinical trial is a research effort, and as such, there are data that cannot be shared. And so there are ethical implications in returning data that are linked to the integrity of the study, like Sylvia said, but that also linked to the fact that it is research. And in order to give meaningful data back to study participants and patients, you have to validate these data and make them interpretable for those who are going to use them. And I think that is not always clear, that there are these demands and that we are struggling with that. Because yes, you can give routine lab work back, and I think you absolutely should do that. But there are points in time where you cannot, and that is not because we don't want to, but at that moment in time we can not yet maybe do that.
Thanks so much. Amy, anything else that you'd like to add on this question?
Well, I think I spoke about the system issues and the interoperability barriers. I think I'm going to add on to my panelists to say, as there certainly are things that we cannot share, but even just connecting patients to the overall results of the study when they're made public or when they have changed the course of science. I've been in 2 studies, the genetic study that I mentioned, and a study as a child where they were comparing the efficacy and if MRIs were a sufficient imaging tool to replace cardiac caths. In both scenarios, the results have been made public. As a younger professional, I was working in the journal industry, medical publications, and I happened to stumble across the publication that I think was part of the study that I was a part of. So it would have been really great to at least be notified that what the results of the study were, to be able to connect them. And then we know now that cardiac MRIs have taken the gold standard of imaging as opposed to cardiac caths. In most circumstances, obviously, cardiac caths are still used in many important places. But so apparently that study that I was a part of was a positive study. So it just would have been good to know these things and connect patients with what you can at the time that you can.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Amy. Moving to another question, what are the key learnings, successes, and challenges related to participant data return that have been seen or experienced to date? So Paula, again, given your experience, maybe I can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of successes, the first point would be really listen to the participants, listen to the sites, listen to the input from the HCPs. It's very important to get input from a range of people before you come up with your solution. When we were designing our solution, we did just that. We conducted market research, and then all of the responses that we got from past study participants, from HCPs, from patient advocacy groups, they all participated in that research, and the feedback was very useful in forming what the solution would look like. So I would highly recommend that. That's been incredibly successful for us. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the other success is we started small. We literally piloted with just 2 studies. Both studies were in the same therapeutic area, and it was just in the US. So we started very small, and that was intentional. And once you can prove that that works and you can have that operationally sound, then start to expand. And that's been invaluable for us, being able to have that experience from just those 2 small studies. And the other thing is, listen to the feedback that you're getting from the participants. So that's been incredibly helpful for us. We're actually implementing more of a feedback solution. We're putting surveys into our portal where we return the results, so we can gather more feedback from the participants in terms of what works for them, what doesn't work for them, are there other things that they would like to see. So we can continue to improve on the solutions that we deliver. And I think in terms of challenges, the key point here would be really communication and change management. So it's very, very important within your organization communicating what you're doing, communicating why you're doing it, why this is so important to do, and making people understand that this is the direction that the organization is taking. Making sure that you actually embed your solution into your operational processes, because this is something you have to be able to do in a very streamlined way. This can't be burdensome. We need to be able to do this as part of our regular standard study conduct. Otherwise, it's just not a feasible solution. So the change management is very, very important. So really focus on that. And the last thing I'd say is, in terms of challenges, go into this knowing that you're not going to be able to deliver a solution that meets 100% of what people want and is going to be available to 100% of participants. That's just not reality. You know, the desire obviously is, yes, we want to give everybody everything they want, but the reality is, you know, that there are operational constraints. And there are things that prevent us delivering everything that we're being asked for. So, you know, settle for 80-20, 90-10, whatever, but go into it knowing you're not going to be able to satisfy 100% of what's being asked of you.
Thanks so much, Paula. Sylvia, I know MRCT has done some really great work in this space, so maybe I'll ask you to chime in as well.
Well, thanks so much. You know, the MRCT Center has worked with key leaders in the field to develop case studies that show different ways to get started, returning individual results and data, what some of the common roadblocks are and how they're kind of overcome, and how people who've been able, and organizations who've done some thoughtful planning, have been able to sort of enable this successfully within their organizations, or at least within their own studies or within their own groups. And so I think the narrative, sort of the storytelling around this, is really important. And so please, I think they're going to put, there's one slide, if we click one slide, there's some information there about the different case studies that we have already developed, really around returning lab results, or, you know, we have Pfizer as one of the cases, non-validated findings, the idea of secondary findings and returning those, really just to help in that socialization process, you know, that Angela mentioned, the deck that there is, you know, giving people an opportunity within your organization to read about how others are doing it. It is being done, and there are people to talk to about this, you know, and so to be able to move that forward, and this part is really a team effort, a group effort. So I invite you to read these case studies, and at that link too, when you go to it, there's a whole website of resources around, like what I mentioned, inventorying what you're collecting, what is it that you can return, when, how, going through that thoughtful process. And there are roadmaps for different stakeholders. And so sponsor roadmap, IRB, ethics boards roadmaps, even a roadmap for participants when thinking about, do I want to get this data? It's available. Do I actually want it? Is this something I want? Really empowering, and because, you know, we want people to be able to feel like they can make the choices that are right for them about the information that's being collected and what they're participating in. So please feel free to do that. And as you do it yourself, contact us at the MRCT, because we love making more case studies to build a library. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sylvia. Another question, there's a lot of great work, of course, available. Sylvia, you mentioned some of MRCT's work. We highlighted TransCelerate's and IHI. So a lot of great work available or forthcoming to support this space. Would love to hear a little bit about what strategies are being explored to ensure collaborations work well together to really amplify those work products and avoid redundancy, and support a future where clinical trials can be accessed at their point of care a bit more seamlessly. So maybe Paula, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so yeah, as you said, you know, there are numerous organizations working on individual participant data returns. So, you know, TransCelerate, IHI Facilitate Initiative, we've talked about MRCT work. And it's important to stress that none of these groups are working in isolation. So there are members that sit on the TransCelerate team that also sit on the IHI Facilitate team. At Pfizer, we worked very closely with MRCT when we were coming up with our initial solution. So all of the initiatives work hand in hand with each other. It's definitely not siloed, and we each take the output from each different initiative and use that and feed that into the solutions that we then take forward. So, you know, a good example. So TransCelerate has delivered the, you know, the participant data return package, and IHI Facilitate is taking that package and assessing it and molding that and putting that into their solutions as they go forward. And so it's all very collaborative, and certainly no siloed work going on.
Thanks, Paula. Yeah, go ahead, Johanna, please.
Yeah, no, I just want to add to what Paula is just explaining. I think nobody works and can work in isolation, and it would also be an extreme waste of time and efforts. And talking about the individual data return package, what IMI Facilitate is building on, because it's building on what TransCelerate has produced, what MRCT has produced, is creating the ethical legal background that makes it possible and that harmonizes, for in this case in Europe, but we have also partners in the US, harmonizes the process. And so it's creating a prototype process that has an ethical legal basis to make it happen. Because there are many different rules and regulations. Just to look at the clinical trial regulation, which has an absolute necessity for consent, but consent is not the legal basis in that case, for while the GDPR in Europe takes it as a legal basis. So in some countries, so you know, we have to make it happen, to be able to get it up to scale and to get everybody, or as much as possible, on board. We have to create this ethical legal ecosystem where we actually can do it and return the data to the participants in a protected way, and in a way that is useful and meaningful for the participant. Let's not forget that what they want, or what they tell us they want, is having their data back as often as possible in a meaningful way, in context. That means I have to know what is happening with this study in a larger sense while having my data back. So, you know, that means, how am I going to do that? Individual data, aggregate data, lay summary. I think MRCT is a very good example of that, but we have to weave them together to do exactly what we pretend to do versus participants, but also at the base towards sponsors, I think.
Thanks so much, Johanna. So I know we're getting close to session end, so I'm going to task our panelists with, it's going to be tough, but if you can give like one sentence on what thought-provoking idea or thought you'd like the audience to leave with. I know we've had a lot of conversations in this group. I'm sure we could have 30-minute discussion on that, but if you could summarize in a quick sentence what you really want the audience to leave with, that would be great. So Paula, if you don't mind going first, that'd be great.
Yes, one leading sentence. I think no barrier to this is insurmountable. You know, this is possible, and I can't encourage you enough. Go away and look at the tools, the toolkit that's being provided by TransCelerate, because that really has some great frameworks and some great considerations for you. So yeah, use the tools that are available to you.
Thanks, Paula. You met the assignment well. Sylvia, if you don't mind going next.
Consider why your organization may not be doing this, and think about, what would need to change in order to make that a priority within your organization or group. Really take that little inventory. I'm all about inventorying today, but take a look, see, and maybe think about how you could change to make this possible.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sylvia. Johanna, if you don't mind going next.
No, no. I think we ask you to go beyond. It's not just how would you like change, but how do you think we should do it? And what do you think are the ingredients to have success? So yeah, tell us that we need to, but also what you expect on a practical basis of us all to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Amy.
Yeah, I think just to remember that the clinical trial data becomes part of that patient's medical history. So withholding it from the patient really does make treating the patient outside the clinical trial very difficult for their healthcare professionals. And to, you never know when that data will be useful to a patient. So even if you can't foresee that it will be useful to them in the immediate term, it may be useful to them in their future.
Thank you so much, Amy. Well, I just want to thank again the panel so much for all of the insights. That was a fantastic discussion, and again, I feel like we could go for another hour, but really just appreciate the insights and perspectives shared by all. If we don't mind going maybe 2 slides ahead. Sylvia, do you want to tee this one up?
I will do it so fast. We have a glossary relaunch at the MRCT Center next week, and really all about plain language and clear information sharing, 160 new definitions, all sorts of great stuff. So feel free to come to the webinar on Tuesday and learn more. You can integrate those into your patient-facing materials like data return packages, individual and aggregate results.
Yeah, we will cross-link in Facilitate because they're working on a glossary, and so a link to yours would just be enrich enormously their efforts.
We can do some translation together. Yes.
Yes, we can do that.
Love that. Collaboration identified on the call itself. That's fantastic. And then maybe moving to the next slide. Also a quick pitch of another TransCelerate public webinar coming up, the pharmacovigilance agreement solutions you didn't realize you needed. So that will be on May 16th and really focus on an overview of our PVAO initiative and the suite of solutions that they've designed to help organizations enhance their PVA process. Moving to the next slide. So going to leave this group with one final poll. I know a lot of really rich content shared today. So after hearing some of the perspectives on the call, would love to hear from the audience of how confident you feel that you could use the iPDR package or other solutions to support return of data to clinical study participants in future studies. So I'll give it a minute for folks to get their answers in. Okay, let's take a look at the results. Okay, somewhat confident, quite confident, very confident. I mean, it's good to see none or not at all confident. So that's good, especially considering the first poll where a lot of folks were at that beginning stage. So thrilled to see that. Well, again, maybe going to the final slide, just want to thank again our panelists. Thanks to everyone who joined. We really appreciate your time. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.